It was one of those warm afternoons when the city felt alive, yet peaceful. The sun shone gently over the streets, and people walked lazily along the sidewalks with coffee cups and shopping bags. The breeze carried the smell of fresh pastries from a small bakery on the corner, and the sound of distant laughter mixed with the hum of traffic. In the middle of this calm scene, an old woman was walking slowly across the street. She held a small grocery bag in each hand, one filled with vegetables, the other with a loaf of bread wrapped in brown paper. Her steps were careful, deliberate. She wasn't in a hurry. Life had taught her to move at her own pace, no matter how fast the world around her seemed to go. She reached the middle of the road when the sound of an engine broke through the calm. It started as a distant rumble, but quickly grew louder, sharper, and almost angry. Heads turned as a large motorcycle sped down the street. The rider wore dark clothes, a helmet with a tinted visor, and gloves that gripped the handles tightly. He was moving too fast for a city street, weaving between cars as though the rules didn't apply to him. People on the sidewalk stepped back, shaking their heads. Someone muttered, "That guy's gonna hurt someone." But before anyone could say more, the biker roared closer, and the old woman was still in his path. She froze. The sound was overwhelming, and the sudden panic made her drop one of her bags. Apples rolled across the street. The biker honked and swerved, missing her by inches. He skidded to a stop, the tires screeching loudly. The noise echoed off the nearby buildings, startling everyone. For a brief moment, everything went silent. Then the biker turned his head and shouted at the old woman, his voice muffled by the helmet but filled with anger. "Watch where you're going!" he yelled, slamming his hand against the handlebar. The old woman's eyes widened. She didn't respond. She bent down slowly, trembling as she tried to pick up her groceries. A few people nearby started walking toward her to help, but they hesitated when the biker revved his engine again, clearly agitated. What no one realized yet was that sitting just a few feet away, outside a small diner, were two men quietly having lunch. They had been talking casually, enjoying the peaceful afternoon. They were easy to miss because they weren't surrounded by cameras or fans. They were just two big guys in plain shirts, sharing stories and laughter. But these weren't just any two men. They were Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and John Cena, two of the most recognizable faces in the world of wrestling and film. They had come to the city for a charity event that morning and decided to grab a quiet meal afterward before heading to their hotel. They were trying to keep a low profile, but when that motorcycle came roaring past, both of them turned their heads at the same time. The Rock frowned. "That sounded close," he said softly. Cena looked toward the street and saw the old woman struggling with her groceries. The biker was still there, yelling. Cena's chair scraped against the ground as he stood up without thinking. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "Something's not right." The Rock followed his gaze. The old woman was clearly frightened. Her groceries were scattered across the road, and the biker was leaning forward like he was about to get off the motorcycle. The traffic light was still red, and a few cars had stopped, unsure what was happening. Without another word, both men stood. Their movements were calm, but there was a certain seriousness about them. The Rock pulled off his sunglasses and glanced around, scanning the scene the way someone trained to handle pressure might. Cena tucked his phone into his pocket and nodded once. They began walking toward the street. Meanwhile, the old woman's hands were shaking as she tried to reach for the last of her apples. The biker revved the engine again, the sound making her flinch. He shouted something else, and no one could hear exactly what, but it was sharp, frustrated. A few people nearby shouted back, telling him to calm down. One man even took out his phone to record, sensing that something was about to happen. The old woman, trying to stay calm, whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Her voice was barely audible over the noise. The biker groaned and kicked at the ground, clearly annoyed that the light hadn't turned green yet. He looked around, noticing people staring at him, phones pointing in his direction. For a moment, his posture changed. He shifted from anger to unease. Then he spotted two large figures walking toward him. At first, he didn't realize who they were. The Rock's broad frame and calm stride drew attention instantly. Cena walked beside him, equally steady but with his usual quiet intensity. People nearby began whispering, recognizing them. Some took photos discreetly, but most just stared. The biker turned his head slightly, still gripping the handlebar. The Rock stopped a few feet away and spoke in a tone that was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. "Hey man," he said, "take it easy. She's just trying to cross the street." The biker's shoulders tensed. "She walked right in front of me," he snapped, his voice echoing inside the helmet. John Cena stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You could have slowed down, he said evenly. Nobody's hurt. Let's keep it that way. The biker hesitated. He looked from one to the other, realizing who they were. For a second, his confidence wavered. The Rock kept his voice level. Look, he said, pointing to the old woman still kneeling on the ground. Why don't you help her pick that up instead of yelling? The biker's hands twitched on the handlebar. The air was thick with tension. Cars behind him were honking now because the light had turned green. But no one moved. Everyone was watching. The old woman turned her head, confused. She didn't understand what was happening, only that two tall strangers were suddenly standing beside her, facing the man who had scared her. The Rock gave her a reassuring nod and said gently, It's okay, ma'am. You're all right. Let's get you out of the street. He reached down, helping her pick up the last few apples. Cena took one of her bags and held it carefully. You're safe, he said softly. Don't worry. The biker mumbled something under his breath but didn't get off the motorcycle. Instead, he revved the engine again, trying to act unfazed. The Rock looked at him once more, his tone firmer this time. You've got a choice, he said. You can keep making noise or you can move on and be better than this. The biker didn't respond. He just stared back for a moment, then slowly turned the throttle. The motorcycle jerked forward and he sped off, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. For a few seconds, all that could be heard was the fading sound of the bike disappearing down the street. Then, almost in unison, people started clapping. Someone shouted, "That was amazing." Another said, "They just stopped a fight." Phones were out, recording, snapping pictures. The Rock looked slightly embarrassed but smiled. "No fight," he said, waving a hand. "Just a misunderstanding." Cena chuckled softly beside him, shaking his head. "You can't even have lunch without something happening," he joked. They helped the old woman back onto the sidewalk. Her voice trembled as she said, "Thank you. Thank you both." "Don't thank us," The Rock said warmly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Cena handed her the grocery bag and added, "You just take care of yourself, all right?" The crowd was still murmuring, amazed by what they'd witnessed. Some people were whispering their names, others were saying how incredible it was to see them in person. But what stood out most wasn't the fame. It was the way they handled the situation. No shouting, no aggression, no showing off. Just calm, steady decency. The Rock bent slightly, checking to make sure the woman hadn't hurt her knee when she dropped her groceries. She smiled through teary eyes and said, "You're good men." "I wish there were more like you," Cena grinned. "There are," he said simply. "They just don't all look like us." That line made her laugh, and the tension finally broke. A few kids nearby waved, calling out, "We love you, Rock." And "Cena, you're the best." They smiled, waved back, and tried to get the attention off themselves. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, painting the buildings with a soft golden glow. The afternoon rush was starting to pick up, but people still couldn't stop talking about what had happened just a short while earlier. A few had taken short videos on their phones, and whispers spread quickly through the small neighborhood. Inside the diner, things had finally calmed down. The two men were back at their table, laughing quietly as the waitress reheated their food. They weren't trying to draw attention to themselves, and yet everyone in the place kept glancing over. Some smiled, some whispered, and a few shyly waved from across the room. The old woman they'd helped had finished her cup of tea and was preparing to leave. Her hands were still a little shaky, but her face was calm now. She turned back toward the diner window once before crossing the street. The two men noticed and waved. She waved back, mouthing a soft, "Thank you." Outside, life went on. Cars moving, people talking, the world spinning like nothing had happened. But something had changed, at least for the people who witnessed it. They had seen something rare. Not just two celebrities stepping in, but two people showing what real decency looked like in the middle of everyday life. Back inside, one of the waiters approached the table shyly. "Excuse me," he said, a little nervous. "I don't want to bother you guys, but that was really nice what you did out there." The Rock smiled warmly. "Hey, no bother, man. Just doing what anyone should do." The waiter grinned awkwardly. Still, not everyone would have. Though. Ed Biker looked angry. Cena nodded, sipping his water. "That's the thing about anger," he said softly. "It feels powerful in the moment, but it burns out fast when someone stays calm." The waiter nodded, thoughtful, and walked away. They sat in silence for a while after that, just eating. Outside, the streetlights were beginning to flicker on one by one. The city was shifting from day to night. The Rock looked out the window, lost in thought. "You know," he said finally, "I can't stop thinking about that guy." "The biker?" Cena glanced up. "Yeah," he said. "Same here." "He didn't look like a bad person," The Rock continued. "Just angry. Like he's been carrying something heavy for too long." Cena leaned back in his chair. "Most people who lash out like that aren't evil," he said. "They're just hurting. But it doesn't excuse what he did." "He scared her half to death." "True," The Rock said. "Still, I hope he learned something from it. Sometimes one moment like that can change someone's path completely." They didn't know it yet. But those words were truer than either of them realized. Because while they were sitting there, a few blocks away, the same biker had pulled over into an alley behind a row of shops. His heart was still pounding, and his hands trembled slightly as he removed his helmet. He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He wasn't proud of what had happened. In fact, as the adrenaline faded, shame started creeping in. The look on that old woman's face, and the fear in her eyes, and memories kept flashing through his mind. He kicked a small rock across the pavement, frustrated with himself. "Idiot," he muttered. "What were you thinking?" He hadn't meant to scare anyone. He just lost his temper. It had been a rough week, actually a rough year. Lost his job, his rent overdue, his bike breaking down twice in 1 month. Everything seemed to pile up, and that moment in traffic had been the final spark that lit the fire. But seeing those two men step in, that was something else. He'd recognize them instantly. He grew up watching them on TV, two guys who always talked about respect, discipline, and doing the right thing. And there he was on the other side of it, looking like the bad guy in his own story. He sighed heavily, rubbing his face. You really messed up this time. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he sat on the curb watching the streetlights flicker. A few kids rode by on bicycles, laughing. For a second, he smiled. It reminded him of when he was younger, when life felt easier, lighter. After a long while, he finally stood up, got back on his bike, and rode off. Slower this time. Much slower. Meanwhile, back at the diner, the two men finished their meal and paid quietly. As they were about to leave, a small boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, ran up to them with his mother right behind. "Excuse me," she said, smiling politely. "My son just wanted to say hello." The boy looked up nervously, clutching a small toy car. "Hi," he said softly. The Rock crouched down to his level and smiled. "Hey, buddy, what's your name?" The boy told him, and they shook hands. Cena knelt too, grinning. "You like cars?" he asked. The boy nodded eagerly. "Cool," Cena said. "Keep playing, keep dreaming big. You never know where it'll take you." The mother thanked them both, saying how much her son looked up to them. The Rock just smiled. "That's what it's all about," he said. "Making the world a little better for the next one coming up." They waved goodbye and walked outside. The night air felt cooler now. The traffic had slowed, and the noise of the city softened into something calm again. As they reached the corner, the Rock stopped and looked at the old tree near the park. "You ever notice," he said, "that moments like this, the unexpected ones, always end up being the ones you remember most?" Cena nodded. "Yeah," he said, "because they remind you who you really are." They both smiled quietly and kept walking. The next morning, the video from the incident started spreading online. It wasn't a flashy clip, just a short, shaky phone recording showing two men calmly helping an old woman and talking down an angry biker. But people were drawn to it. Not because of the fame, but because of the humanity in it. Comments flooded in. "This is what real strength looks like." They didn't yell, didn't fight, just helped. The world needs more moments like this. By noon, it was everywhere. News outlets picked it up, fans shared it, and the video began trending. But the two men weren't thinking about that. They were already at the charity event they'd planned, surrounded by volunteers and children, helping raise money for a local youth program. Still, even as they smiled for photos and signed autographs, the incident stayed in their minds, and especially the Rock's. He couldn't stop wondering about the biker. Later that day, when the event wrapped up, they decided to stop by a small coffee shop before heading out of town. The shop owner greeted them warmly and insisted their drinks were on the house. As they waited for their order, a familiar sound rumbled outside, the sound of a motorcycle engine. The Rock and Cena looked at each other. It couldn't be, could it? The door opened, and in walked the same biker from yesterday. He wasn't wearing his helmet now, and his eyes looked tired, unsure. When he spotted them, he froze for a second. The room fell quiet. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then slowly, he walked toward their table. He started, struggling for words. I didn't expect to see you here. The Rock nodded calmly. Neither did we. The biker swallowed hard. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For yesterday. For how I acted. He paused, glancing at the floor. I shouldn't have yelled. I scared her. I was just angry. Not at her. At everything. Cena's expression softened. It takes a lot to admit that, he said. Most people just walk away and pretend it didn't happen. The biker nodded, still nervous. I've been thinking about it all night. I couldn't sleep. I watched the video, and I saw myself. It wasn't a good feeling. The morning after the incident, the neighborhood felt unusually quiet. The streets that were normally buzzing with cars, cyclists, and pedestrians had a slower, calmer rhythm. People still whispered to each other about what had happened the day before, and some shook their heads in disbelief, still amazed by the presence of two men stepping in to protect an elderly woman. The old woman had returned to her small apartment with her groceries carefully unpacked. She put away the vegetables, arranged the bread on the counter, and sat down for a moment, her hands trembling slightly as she recalled the events. She wasn't used to confrontation. Most days were quiet and predictable, and that moment had shaken her, but in the same breath it had also filled her with a sense of relief. Somehow, two strangers had turned an intense, frightening moment into something safe and calm. Meanwhile, the Rock and John Cena had returned to their hotel after the charity event the previous evening. Both were exhausted, but carried a sense of satisfaction from the day's experiences. Even after years of performing in front of massive crowds, this small, real-life moment had left a deeper impression than any staged performance could. Over breakfast, they sat quietly in the hotel dining room. The soft clinking of silverware muted conversation, and the aroma of coffee filled the space. Neither of them had to speak much. Just the shared look across the table was enough to convey the same thought. Yesterday had been different. You think he'll really change? Cena asked, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. The Rock looked out the window at the city below. I think he already started, he said quietly. You can see it in people sometimes. One moment, one choice, and suddenly things are different. I hope he takes that choice seriously. Cena nodded slowly, thoughtful. It's crazy how one moment can flip someone's whole day, or week, or even life. That old lady, the biker, it's like everything came to a head in one place at one time. I know, The Rock said, and it could have gone really bad. But it didn't, that's the point. Calmness, presence, compassion, that's the real strength, not fists or threats. Back on the street, the biker had spent the night tossing and turning. Sleep had been impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the scene over and over. The old woman, the scattered groceries, the calm, firm presence of the two men who had confronted him. It wasn't fear this time that kept him awake. It was guilt. The realization of his own behavior weighed heavily on him. Finally, sometime in the early morning hours, he rose and decided to take a walk. He needed space to think, to breathe, to clear his mind before the day began. The streets were nearly empty, and the cool morning air brushed against his face as he walked. Every step was slow and deliberate, as if he were trying to process the moment in his own mind. He passed the street where it all had happened and stopped for a long time. The sunlight was just beginning to filter through the trees, casting gentle shadows across the asphalt. He crouched down, staring at the spot where the old woman had dropped her groceries. The memories of yesterday felt both distant and immediate, like a wave crashing over him and then receding. As he stood there, he realized something he hadn't thought of before. It wasn't just about the fear he had caused. It was about the lesson he had been given, the quiet, patient lesson that actions have consequences, that people notice even small acts, and that sometimes kindness is stronger than anger. He had watched the way those two men had approached the situation. Not shouting, not threatening, not showing off, just calm, grounded, and full of authority without intimidation. That was strength, the kind that didn't require proving anything to anyone. The thoughtling aired with him as he continued his walk. By the time he returned to his small apartment, he felt slightly lighter, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months beginning to bloom. He didn't know exactly how he would make amends, but he knew he had to start somewhere. Later that morning, the old woman left her apartment to go to the nearby grocery store. She wanted to restock a few things she hadn't had time to buy yesterday. As she walked, she thought about the incident over and over. She marveled at the calmness of the two men who had helped her. They didn't raise their voices or threaten anyone. They simply did what was right in the moment. She paused on the corner near the diner, looking at the street. Everything was quiet, normal again, but in her mind the events felt larger than life. She could still see the biker, the raised motorcycle, and the calm presence of those two strangers. She didn't know why they had been there, but she felt gratitude, deep, unshakable gratitude. At the same time, people in the neighborhood were still talking about the previous day. A small group of bystanders from the incident had gathered near the park across the street. They discussed what they had seen, still amazed by the calm, composed way the situation had been handled. One of them, a young man holding a phone, said, "It's not about them being famous. It's about the way they handled it. That was real strength." Another woman nodded. "Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in anger, but to stay calm and protect someone else, that's something else entirely." Nearby, a man who had witnessed the scene from his car window said quietly, "I hope he learned his lesson. I hope that biker really understood what happened." And somewhere not far away, the biker himself was listening, not in person, but through the video that had been shared online. Someone had posted the footage of the incident, shaky but clear, showing the moment the Rock and Cena had intervened. He watched it over and over, each time noticing details he hadn't before. The way the old woman's hands trembled as she picked up her groceries. The calmness in the two men's voices. The way they positioned themselves between him and the woman, not aggressively but with authority. It wasn't just a video. It was a mirror. It reflected his own actions and the consequences in a way he couldn't ignore. And slowly he began to see the possibility of being better, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. By mid-morning, both The Rock and Cena had returned to their hotel rooms briefly to prepare for a meeting with the charity organizers. They spoke briefly about the incident again, more in reflection than planning. "You think the world even notices these things?" Cena asked. The Rock shrugged. "Some do, some don't, but the people who do, they remember. It's like planting a seed. You don't always see it grow right away, but eventually it does." Cena smiled slightly. "I hope that biker's seed grows." "Me too," The Rock said. "Me too." Around lunchtime, the old woman returned home from her second shopping trip. Her apartment felt warmer than usual, and she noticed that the sun was shining through her kitchen window in a new way. She arranged her groceries carefully, unpacked the vegetables, and sat down with a cup of tea, thinking about the past day. She realized something important. Though she had been scared, she had also been reminded of the goodness in people. She thought about the two strangers, how they had stepped in without hesitation, and how simple and powerful their actions had been. It was easy to feel small in a world full of chaos, she realized. But moments like these reminded her that being human was more than surviving. It was about noticing, acting, and protecting others when you could. Meanwhile, back on the streets, the biker had made another decision. He had to apologize in person to the old woman, not with words on a screen, not with a message online, but face to face. He wanted to show her that he understood, that he regretted what he had done, and that he was willing to. The evening settled over the neighborhood with a calm that felt almost like a reward for everything that had happened over the past few days. The sun was dipping low, casting long golden shadows along the sidewalks. Streetlights flickered on, and the hum of distant traffic mixed with the occasional laughter of children playing in the park. Life was moving, yet somehow slower, gentler after the events that had unfolded. The old woman sat on her small balcony, sipping a cup of tea, her gaze sweeping across the quiet street below. She had replayed the incident in her mind countless times, each memory vivid and clear. The fear she had felt that afternoon still lingered slightly, but it had been replaced by something stronger, a feeling of safety, of hope, and of gratitude. She thought about the two men who had stepped in to help her, their calm authority and the kindness in their eyes. It amazed her that strangers could act so bravely, yet so quietly, without any need for attention or praise. Across town, the biker was experiencing a similar quiet reflection. After his apology to the woman earlier in the day, he had spent hours walking through the streets, thinking about the choices that had brought him here. He had begun to understand that anger could be a weight, but responsibility could be a path forward. Each step he took felt lighter than the last, as though releasing the tension that had built inside him for months. He had spent the day considering what to do next. Simply apologizing to the woman was a start, but he realized he wanted to make a bigger change in his life. He didn't have a clear plan yet, but he knew that something inside him had shifted. The way those two men had handled the situation, not with force, not with intimidation, but with calm, unwavering presence, had given him a perspective he hadn't had before. It was like watching a mirror of himself, but in the way he wanted to be rather than the way he had acted. That evening, the old woman's daughter called her. She had heard about the incident from neighbors and wanted to check in. "Mom," she said with concern, "are you okay?" "Everyone's talking about what happened." The old woman smiled softly, her voice calm. "I'm fine, really. It was frightening, yes, but I'm okay. Those two gentlemen, they helped me. Calmly, kindly. They didn't yell or fight, they just made sure I was safe." Her daughter's voice softened. "You're not hurt?" "No," she said. "I'm completely fine." And it reminded me something important. There's still so much good in people. Meanwhile, the biker was visiting a small local community center. He had decided to volunteer, at least for a few hours, as a way to redirect his energy and learn to make positive choices. He was greeted warmly by the staff, who didn't know who he was or what had happened earlier in the week. They saw him simply as someone who wanted to help, and that simplicity brought him a surprising sense of peace. He spent hours cleaning, organizing, and helping with minor tasks, and with each small act he felt a growing confidence. He realized that change didn't have to happen all at once. It could happen step by step, moment by moment, choice by choice. That afternoon he even found himself smiling genuinely, a feeling he hadn't experienced fully in months. Back in the neighborhood, the old woman had finished her evening tea and moved inside to her small living room. She took out an old photograph of herself and her late husband, sitting quietly in the soft glow of her lamp. She reflected on how life could be unpredictable, sometimes frightening, sometimes beautiful, and often both at the same time. She thought about how one moment of courage and kindness could ripple outward, touching not just the people involved, but everyone who witnessed it, directly or indirectly. At the diner where the two men had eaten previously, the Rock and John Cena were winding down from their day. They had spent the afternoon attending the charity event, signing autographs and interacting with fans. Yet even amidst all the noise and attention, their thoughts kept returning to the old woman, the biker, and the calm, simple intervention that had changed everything. "It's amazing," Cena said quietly, leaning back in his chair. "One afternoon, one choice, and suddenly someone's life is different. It's almost hard to believe how much impact a small act can have." The Rock nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes we focus too much on big gestures. But real change, real impact, comes from being present, noticing what's happening and acting with intention. That's the lesson in all of this." As the night grew deeper, the old woman prepared for bed. She arranged her blankets, switched off the lights, and sat quietly for a moment before closing her eyes. The memory of the events replayed one final time. The motorcycle revving, the scattered groceries, the calm faces of the two men, and the relief of being helped. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for what they had done, but for what it reminded her, that courage, kindness, and humanity still existed in the world. The biker, too, was ending his day with reflection. After volunteering and walking through the quiet streets, he returned to his apartment. He sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel restless or angry. He felt a quiet sense of purpose. He knew he had made mistakes, but he also knew he had the capacity to make better choices. That realization was powerful in a way he hadn't expected. The next morning, the neighborhood began to stir again. People went about their routines, but there was a noticeable difference in the air. A sense of calm and a hint of inspiration lingering from the events of the previous days. The old woman walked slowly down the street to the corner cafe, greeted by neighbors who asked how she was. She smiled and told them she was fine, sharing a small story about the kindness she had experienced. Meanwhile, the biker returned to the community center. He had decided to dedicate a few hours each week to volunteering. It wasn't about recognition or reward. It was about learning, growing, and making choices that aligned with the better version of himself he wanted to be. He helped with organizing supplies, assisting the staff, and engaging with the children who came to the center. With each small interaction, he felt the weight of yesterday's anger lift a little more. That afternoon, the old woman and the biker crossed paths again, this time by chance at a small market. The biker approached her cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hello," he said softly. "I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay." The old woman looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. She saw sincerity there, the visible effort to be better. She nodded slowly. "I am okay," she said gently. "Thank you for checking." They shared a small smile, an acknowledgement of the lesson they had both learned. That respect, kindness, and humility were more powerful than fear or anger. By evening, the news of the incident had spread further. Online stories, local news segments, and social media posts highlighted the calm intervention by two strangers, inspiring countless people. But for those involved, it wasn't about recognition. It was about the reminder that actions, even small ones, could ripple outward in unexpected ways. The old woman sat on her balcony again, watching the city lights twinkle as the stars began to emerge. She thought about the past few days, the fear, the relief, the lessons, and the kindness she had witnessed. She felt a quiet, deep satisfaction, not from fame or attention, but from the reminder that humanity and courage still existed in the world. The biker returned home that night feeling lighter than he had in months. He knew that change wouldn't happen all at once, but he also knew that he had begun a journey, one step at a time, one choice at a time. He had learned that courage wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was the ability to face your mistakes, own them, and strive to do better. Meanwhile, the Rock and John Cena had left the city, returning to their busy schedules, traveling from one event to another. Yet even as they performed in front of massive crowds and faced demanding workdays, the memory of the old woman and the biker lingered. It reminded them that true impact didn't always come from spectacle, but from the quiet, decisive moments when someone chose to do the right thing. Weeks later, the neighborhood had returned to normal. The streets were busy, the cafes full, and life carried on. But those who had witnessed the events of that afternoon still remembered them. They remembered how two strangers had stepped in, how one frightened woman had been protected, and how one man had begun a path toward change. The story became a small legend in the community, a reminder that goodness existed in ordinary people, that courage wasn't always loud, and that kindness could transform lives. The old woman continued her daily routines, stronger and more confident, knowing she could handle life's surprises. The biker kept his promise to himself, volunteering regularly, learning patience and empathy, and slowly rebuilding a sense of pride in himself. And somewhere, far from the neighborhood, the Rock and Cena carried the memory with them, a reminder of the subtle, quiet power that exists when someone acts with integrity and compassion. And so, life continued, ordinary yet extraordinary in its simplicity. A single act of courage, a quiet choice to intervene, had changed the course of multiple lives. Fear had been met with calm. Anger had been met with understanding. And humanity had been affirmed in a world that often seemed chaotic. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that real heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they simply stand up when it matters most, speak softly when the world shouts, and act decisively to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. Oh, change. The thought filled him with both nervousness and determination. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of direction. He started planning a route to her apartment, rehearsing the words he would say, thinking about how to express his sincerity without overcomplicating it. By mid-afternoon, he had parked his motorcycle a few blocks away. He walked slowly, rehearsing his apology, and tried to steady his breathing. His mind raced through the events, replaying the moments that had led him here, thinking about what he had learned. He arrived at the small building where the old woman lived. He paused outside for a long time, his hands trembling slightly. Then he took a deep breath and rang the bell. Inside, the old woman was sitting by her window when she heard the doorbell. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she opened the door and saw the biker standing there, his helmet in his hand, looking nervous and ashamed. I wanted to apologize," he said softly, "for yesterday. I shouldn't have yelled. I shouldn't have scared you. I'm sorry." The old woman studied him for a long moment. She saw the honesty in his eyes, the regret on his face. Slowly, she nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she said gently. "I accept your apology." The biker exhaled, relieved. For the first time, he felt a weight lift from his chest. She invited him inside, and they talked for a few minutes about simpler things. The weather, groceries, daily routines, small human things that reminded him that life didn't have to be filled with anger and frustration. By the time he left, he had a new perspective. One confrontation, two strangers stepping in, and a willingness to accept responsibility had changed something deep inside him. And far away, the Rock and Cena continued their day, unaware that their simple, calm intervention had sparked a chain of events that would make the world a little better. For a woman, a man, and perhaps for countless others who would hear the story later. The Rock motioned for him to sit down. "Take a seat," he said kindly. The biker hesitated, then pulled up a chair. He looked uncomfortable, out of place, but they made him feel at ease. "You know," the Rock said after a moment, "everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do after." The biker nodded slowly. "I don't know how to make it right, though." "Start with that woman," Cena said. "Find a way to say sorry. Maybe help someone else. You'll figure it out." For the first time, the biker smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe I can do that." They talked for a while, not about fame or movies or wrestling, but about life, mistakes, and second chances. By the time the biker left, he looked lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When he walked out, he turned back once and said, "Thanks for not judging me." The Rock smiled. "Just pass it on," he said. "That's all we ask." After he left, Cena leaned back and exhaled. "You think he'll change?" The Rock looked out the window, watching the bike disappear down the street. "I think he already started." That night, as the city lights flickered across the skyline, the story of what happened continued to spread, not as gossip, but as inspiration. People shared it, talked about it, and for a brief moment, the internet wasn't filled with anger or noise, but with something gentler, hope. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage, so the days after the incident settled into a steady rhythm. But for everyone involved, life felt subtly different. The neighborhood seemed quieter yet warmer, as though the memory of the confrontation and the calm way it had been handled lingered in the air. People talked less about the hustle of their routines and more about noticing small gestures of kindness around them. The old woman had returned to her usual habits, walking slowly down the streets, greeting neighbors and carrying her groceries. But something had shifted in her. She walked taller now, more confident in herself, even when small accidents happened. A dropped bag, a spilled coffee. She handled them without flinching, remembering that a simple calm response could prevent chaos from taking over. The biker, too, was adjusting. His life hadn't transformed overnight, but each day he made small changes, and those changes slowly began to matter. He woke earlier, organized his apartment, and set a goal for himself every morning. Sometimes it was simple. Make someone smile, help carry groceries, volunteer a few hours, but the point was to act intentionally rather than react impulsively. One morning, he decided to visit the park near the street where it had all happened. It wasn't far from the diner where the Rock and Cena had eaten, but he didn't go there with any expectation of seeing them. He just wanted to walk, reflect, and clear his mind. The park was quiet, with sunlight streaming through the trees and birds singing from the branches. Children ran around playing tag, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. He sat down on a bench, watching life unfold around him. He noticed a young mother struggling with a stroller and a toddler trying to climb out of it. He stood quickly, walking over to help her secure the straps. She smiled and thanked him, and something inside him shifted. He felt the satisfaction of having done the right thing without any recognition. It was a small act, but it meant more than anything he had done in months. Meanwhile, the old woman had gone to the same park to feed the birds. She carried a small bag of crumbs in her hand, scattering them gently on the ground. The birds fluttered and chirped, and she smiled quietly, enjoying the calm. When she noticed the man from the other day, the biker, helping the young mother, she recognized him immediately.